The galaxy had grown used to spectacle. For centuries, the great empires had broadcast their wars like theater, proud demonstrations of strength designed to remind weaker species of their place. When Earth was dragged into that stage, humanity was expected to break quietly, another primitive people crushed before a galactic audience. What came instead was the massacre of 7 million souls, delivered not in silence, but in front of trillions of alien eyes, a performance meant to teach every watching world that resistance was hopeless. The cameras lingered on screams, fires, and executions, as if cruelty could be entertainment. It was not war, it was a demonstration, a warning carved into flesh. The alien overlords smiled as they slaughtered entire cities, convinced the broadcast would cement their power. They spoke of humans as vermin, as an infestation to be burned away. Their fleets hung above Earth like gods, raining fire while their voices carried across the galactic networks. This is what happens to defiance. The crowd of distant species cheered, some indifferent, some fearful, but all convinced the lesson was clear. Humanity was overmatched, and its suffering was proof of the Council's control. On Earth, the silence that followed was not submission. For every screen captured on alien feeds, there was a moment of frozen shock in living rooms, shelters, and bunkers. 7 million lives gone in hours, extinguished not for victory but for spectacle. And then came the anger, spreading faster than fire, hotter than any weapon. It crossed borders that had once divided nations, erased grudges that had lasted generations. In that instant, humanity became a single voice, united not by diplomacy but by fury. What the aliens mistook for weakness was only stillness before the storm. The faces of the dead became icons. Their last moments, replayed endlessly on alien channels, were captured and stored by Earth's networks, not as humiliation but as fuel. Children remembered the sound of orbital strikes. Parents remembered the shadows of falling cities. Soldiers remembered the helplessness of standing with weapons useless against orbiting giants. And all remembered that the aliens had laughed. That laughter cut deeper than the loss itself, and in it humanity saw not strength but arrogance, an arrogance that could be shattered. In the alien councils, the event was declared a triumph. They congratulated themselves, calling it the pacification of a primitive world. To them, humans were nothing more than background noise in the great theater of the stars. The execution of millions was not a crime but a demonstration of civilization. They could not imagine that in giving the galaxy their spectacle, they had also given humanity its rallying cry. For in those moments of fire and ash, humanity shed its divisions and looked outward with a single demand: vengeance. Factories lit their furnaces before the embers of cities had cooled. Laboratories turned from peaceful research to reverse engineering alien scraps. Farmers volunteered their harvests for soldiers they had never met. Nations emptied treasuries, not to rebuild but to rearm. The old rivalries of Earth faded as quickly as smoke in the wind, replaced by a singular truth: if humanity did not rise now, it would be erased tomorrow. No alien had believed that a world scarred by war, divided by borders, and fractured by ideology could unite. But the images of the dead had forged something the empires had never encountered: a species whose grief had no room for surrender. The broadcast, meant to humiliate, became the seed of fear, for the humans who watched it were not broken. They memorized the faces of the officers who ordered the slaughter. They marked the symbols on the ships that delivered the fire. They recorded the names of the alien commanders who mocked them, and swore that every one would burn. The empires had thought themselves untouchable, distant, immortal. They had never faced prey that learned, adapted, and turned rage into discipline. 7 million lives ended in one broadcast. To the galaxy, it was a warning of power. To humanity, it was a declaration of war. In that silence after the smoke, a truth emerged that no empire could erase. Earth would never forgive, never forget, and never stop until the blood price was answered. The invaders had written their message in fire. Humanity would answer in kind, and their response would not be for broadcast, it would be for history. The days that followed were not marked by mourning but by motion. Grief hardened into resolve, and what might have been despair instead became a frenzy of preparation. Humanity had been shown its enemy, And though the gap between Earth and the stars seemed immeasurable, the species refused to accept powerlessness. Factories that once produced cars, planes, and electronics were stripped down overnight to forge weapons. Engineers who had studied peacetime problems found themselves bent over salvaged alien wreckage, tearing apart every piece for answers. Entire industries reshaped in days, accelerated not by gradual planning but by the ruthless clarity of survival. Nations that had for centuries clung to old divisions suddenly tore down their walls. Leaders who once bargained and postured in conference halls found themselves replaced or reformed by the sheer demand of their people. The cries of the dead made compromise irrelevant. Borders mattered little when the threat came from the sky. Soldiers trained with weapons they knew were outmatched, yet drilled anyway, aware that even obsolete rifles could matter if placed in the right hands. It was not the machines that gave humanity its chance. It was the will to endure, no matter the odds. Strategists began studying alien tactics with obsessive precision. Every broadcast, every battle clip, every intercepted signal was dissected and catalogued. Where the aliens flaunted their overwhelming firepower, humans noticed their complacency. Where the empires struck with overwhelming force, humans saw rigidity. It was the same arrogance that had led them to commit their atrocity in front of the galaxy. To them, humanity was not worth real study. To humans, that arrogance was an opening. Networks of scientists and hackers worked without pause, building on fragments of alien technology. Power cells became the basis of new weapons. Communications equipment was reverse-engineered and converted into jamming systems. Even debris scattered across ruined cities was collected, melted down, and recast into ammunition. The ingenuity that had once powered industrial revolutions now turned to war with unmatched speed. What the aliens saw as junk, humanity saw as blueprints for resistance. In darkened bunkers and hidden labs, breakthroughs came one after another. A drone guidance system adapted from civilian use became a strike craft capable of swarming enemy patrols. An experimental propulsion system from a downed scout ship was replicated crudely but effectively, giving Earth its first step toward true space combat. These were not polished designs. They were brutal, improvised, and prone to failure. But where one machine broke, another replaced it, and where one tactic faltered, another emerged. No failure was wasted, for humans learned with every setback. The first strikes were small, barely noticed by the galactic powers. An isolated convoy ambushed, a scouting vessel crippled by jury-rigged missiles, a supply depot burned to ash by resistance fighters. To the empires, these were trivial irritations, signs of desperation. To humanity, they were victories carved from impossibility. Each act carried the weight of the 7 million lost, each success a message: Earth would not stay silent. The morale of humanity surged as these victories accumulated. Every destroyed alien craft became a symbol, every captured weapon a testament to adaptability. The invaders had expected submission. Instead, they faced an enemy that grew sharper with each passing week. While their fleets rested on their laurels, humanity refused to rest at all. Exhaustion became normal, sacrifice became duty, and survival became the only currency that mattered. In alien halls of power, advisors warned their rulers of a growing danger. Reports spoke of humans fighting with irrational ferocity, of soldiers who refused to break even when defeat was certain. Yet those warnings were dismissed. To the empires, Earth was still primitive, its resistance a temporary nuisance. They could not comprehend that they had awakened something far greater than themselves. What they saw as stubbornness was, in truth, a transformation. Humanity no longer thought of defense alone. Every blueprint drawn, every weapon forged, every strategy rehearsed carried a single purpose: retaliation. The world was no longer divided into nations but unified into a war machine, not out of ambition but out of necessity. The 7 million dead were no longer victims. They had become the foundation of a cause that no alien empire could extinguish. The awakening was complete. Humanity had been forced into a crucible and emerged with a singular focus. No alien calculation accounted for what was forming on Earth. The invaders believed they had crushed resistance in a single broadcast. Instead, they had built an enemy that would fight without limits, innovate without pause, and refused to accept any outcome but vengeance. The first sparks of resistance gave way to something larger, something the invaders had never imagined possible. Small ambushes evolved into coordinated offensives. What began as scattered defiance matured into strategy woven across continents. Humanity was no longer reacting to alien strikes. It was dictating the tempo of conflict. Every fleet movement, every supply chain, every exposed weakness was studied and exploited. The empires, accustomed to absolute control, discovered their dominance no longer guaranteed safety. Humanity understood it could not match alien technology in scale, but it could make every resource count. The Earth that once struggled with scarcity became a planet that wasted nothing. Salvaged armor was hammered into plating for improvised vehicles. Satellite fragments were reassembled into crude orbital eyes, watching alien movements. Old nuclear arsenals, once considered relics of a darker age, were pulled from storage and refitted to pierce shields that had been thought impenetrable. The aliens had superior science, but humans had desperation, and desperation drove invention with terrifying speed. The first coordinated counteroffensive came not from massive fleets, but from the unexpected precision of guerrilla warfare. Alien convoys were ambushed in asteroid belts by ships so crude they should not have left orbit. Cargo vessels burned, escorts shattered, and human broadcasts carried the images across the stars, humanity striking back. For the first time, the galaxy saw that Earth was not broken, it was hunting. With each victory, humans became bolder. Fleets of drones swarmed larger enemy vessels, overwhelming them in numbers. Computer viruses adapted from simple malware crippled navigation systems, turning warships into drifting hulks. Entire colonies were left starving when human strikes cut supply lines. No alien had considered that a species so primitive could turn their own tools against them so effectively. Every captured database, every seized weapon became a weaponized lesson. Psychological warfare became a deliberate weapon. The same way aliens had broadcast the slaughter of 7 million, humanity now transmitted its victories. Prisoners of war begged for their lives on open channels, their fear dissected by human interrogators. Alien soldiers wept on camera as they described fleets torn apart. To the council races, this was unthinkable cruelty. To humanity, it was justice measured in terror. The empires who once laughed at Earth now trembled at what their citizens saw, invincible fleets reduced to wreckage by a species barely a century into spaceflight. The turning point came when humanity deployed weapons that no one expected. Orbital platforms once used for civilian communication became railgun arrays, spearing battleships with slugs accelerated at impossible speeds. Swarms of automated strike craft harried cruisers until even their escorts could not shield them. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully planned traps, ripping through fleets accustomed to fighting predictable battles. Each victory carried cost, but humans never measured loss as weakness. They measured it as fuel for greater determination. The alien empires, long divided among themselves, began to recognize the scale of the threat too late. Their rivalries prevented unity, while humanity fought as one organism. Where aliens hesitated to risk their own, humanity threw everything into the fire. Every city leveled, every soldier lost only deepened the resolve of the survivors. The calculus was alien to the invaders, no price was too high for vengeance. Entire star systems fell silent under human assault. Colonies that had once prospered under imperial banners were left in ruin. Supply depots burned, refueling stations collapsed, and frontline fleets retreated under the relentless pressure. The galaxy watched in shock as the balance of power shifted. A primitive planet had become the most feared war engine in living memory. For the alien citizens who once celebrated Earth's destruction, fear replaced laughter. They had believed humanity's story ended with the broadcast of slaughter. Now they saw a new broadcast, alien fleets crumbling, homeworlds threatened, empires on their knees. Humanity had no interest in negotiation, no desire for compromise. This was not survival alone. This was the slow, deliberate dismantling of every power that had thought itself untouchable. The invaders had wanted a spectacle of dominance. What they had created instead was a spectacle of defiance, carried across the stars by the very systems they once controlled. Humanity was no longer prey. It had become the predator, and the galaxy finally understood what that meant. Humanity did not stop at defense, nor did it pause once victory seemed possible. The war had shifted beyond survival. It had become a mission of erasure. Every strike was now calculated not merely to cripple but to annihilate. Entire alien fleets were not just defeated but hunted down to the last vessel. Retreat was not permitted. Surrender was not acknowledged. The price for 7 million murdered was no longer measured in battles, it was measured in civilizations. The campaign surged outward, spreading across systems once thought untouchable. Human fleets, ragged but relentless, pressed deeper into enemy space with each passing month. Where alien generals expected hesitation, they met overwhelming ferocity. Planets were bombarded until cities turned to glass. Orbital strikes cracked continents open, leaving scars visible from space. Colonies begged for mercy, but none was offered. Humanity's message was written in fire: no world complicit in the massacre would survive. The empires pleaded for diplomacy. Broadcasts were sent offering peace, reparations, even the surrender of their commanders. Humanity answered with silence, broken only by the roar of weapons. Alien diplomats accused Earth of barbarism, of crimes against life itself, but their protests rang hollow. The galaxy remembered who had begun the spectacle, who had turned slaughter into a stage. Now it was humanity's turn to wield the stage, and its performance was genocide. The methods were cold and systematic. Human fleets cut supply lines to starve populations, then returned weeks later to finish them. Biological weapons, once banned on Earth, were unleashed on alien garrisons. Viruses were engineered to target species-specific genomes, spreading through water, air, and even the soil. Cities collapsed not just from bombardment but from famine and disease. The empires had considered themselves civilized, restrained by rules of war. Humanity recognized no such rules. For every world burned, survivors attempted to flee, but even refugees were not spared. Convoys were intercepted, ships scuttled, entire populations vented into the void. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was a principle etched into Earth's heart. No witness would remain to laugh at human suffering again. The brutality was not wild but deliberate, executed with chilling precision. Humanity was not destroying blindly. It was cleansing, removing every trace of those who had once mocked its existence. Alien civilians who had once cheered the broadcast of Earth's suffering now faced their own terror. Families huddled beneath bombardments, their screams carried over the same networks that once mocked humanity. Footage of their desperation spread, but this time, the galaxy did not cheer. They watched in silence as the predators they had underestimated turned into extinction engines. Empires that once held dominion over dozens of species now trembled, fearing they would be next. The war reached a scale that no one had imagined. Homeworlds, ancient capitals that had stood for millennia, fell in hours. Oceans boiled under nuclear fire. Forests ignited and spread flames across entire continents. Moons were shattered by kinetic strikes, their fragments raining down on the planets below. Alien leaders who once broadcast threats now begged for mercy in desperate transmissions that humanity erased without response. The galaxy's balance of power collapsed. Alliances meant nothing in the face of Earth's campaign. Species that had once rivaled each other now whispered in fear of the humans, but it was already too late. Humanity had no interest in conquest, no ambition for empire. Its only goal was destruction, and it pursued that goal with unwavering focus. To leave the task unfinished would be betrayal to the dead. By the time the campaign slowed, entire species were gone. Records, cultures, histories, all erased in the firestorm. Alien monuments stood in ruins, toppled not by time but by calculated strikes. The survivors of humanity watched these images with grim satisfaction. Every city turned to ash was another offering to the 7 million who had been taken. Every exterminated world was another entry in the ledger of vengeance. When the last major fleet of the Empire was destroyed, silence fell across the stars. The laughter that once mocked Earth had been replaced by fear that echoed through every system. The aliens had sought to humiliate humanity with a single broadcast. In response, humanity had ended their civilizations. What remained was not negotiation, not balance, but absence. The galaxy now carried scars that would last for eons, carved by the fury of a species that refused to forgive. When the fires burned out and the fleets returned, Earth did not celebrate. The silence that settled was heavier than any victory song. Humanity had triumphed, but it was a triumph written in ash and ruin. Entire civilizations lay erased, their voices gone forever. The images of alien homeworlds reduced to scorched spheres stood as grim mirrors of the massacre that had begun it all. Vengeance had been achieved, yet it came at a cost that could not be measured in numbers. Humanity had proven it could not be broken, but in proving it, the species had revealed what it was willing to become. Monuments rose where the first cities had burned, each one etched with the names of the 7 million who had died in the broadcast. They were not remembered as victims but as the spark that had transformed Earth into a weapon. Nations carved their grief into stone, reminding future generations why the galaxy had been set aflame. Children grew up beneath these monuments, aware that they lived because others had been lost, and because humanity had chosen to answer loss with fire. Across the galaxy, silence replaced arrogance. Where alien leaders once spoke of dominance, they now spoke in whispers, fearful that humanity might turn its gaze toward them. No species dared broadcast war again. Networks that had once carried spectacles of conquest now replayed the footage of fleets shattered and homeworlds erased, reminders that the prey they mocked had become predators beyond reckoning. Yet among humanity itself, debate grew. Some called it justice, long overdue, a debt finally paid in full. Others feared what had been unleashed, questioning whether the price had gone too far. The word genocide hung heavy in the air, spoken cautiously but never dismissed. For the survivors, it was not a matter of morality but of necessity. They had been shown no mercy, and so they had given none. But the weight of extermination lingered, carved into the conscience of a species that had once sworn never again after its own wars of blood. Veterans returned hollow, carrying memories of entire worlds silenced under their command. Scientists who had crafted weapons of extinction lived with the knowledge of what their inventions had done. Families who had demanded vengeance now struggled to reconcile the enormity of what had been accomplished. The war had unified humanity, but the aftermath left it staring into a mirror, uncertain if the reflection was still recognizable. The galaxy, however, had no doubts. Humanity had rewritten its place among the stars. No longer dismissed as primitive, no longer ignored as irrelevant, it was now spoken of as the apex predator of civilization itself. Species that had once mocked Earth now avoided even its name in conversation. The humans had shown a truth none wished to acknowledge: survival was not their greatest strength, relentless retaliation was. In time, Earth sent a final broadcast across the same channels that had once carried its humiliation. The message was simple, devoid of grandeur or spectacle. A single voice declared that humanity had avenged its dead, and that it had no interest in conquest or empire. The warning was clear: never again would such an atrocity be tolerated. Should another attempt be made, the response would be absolute, final, and beyond imagining. The words were carried to every corner of the galaxy, etched into memory by the fear that followed them. The stars themselves seemed quieter after that. Trade resumed, borders shifted, empires rebuilt, but the shadow of humanity lingered. Children of alien worlds grew up hearing stories of the humans, not as victims but as the destroyers who had turned grief into extinction. Some feared them, some respected them, but all understood the truth that could never be erased: humanity was not prey. On Earth, life slowly began again. Cities were rebuilt, families grew, and the world turned. But beneath every act of peace lay the memory of what had been done. Humanity had shown it could unify, adapt, and rise above any adversary. It had also shown that when pushed to the edge, it would not stop until nothing remained of those who had wronged it. That dual legacy, of resilience and of vengeance, became the defining mark of its place in the cosmos. The 7 million lost in fire had not vanished into silence. Their deaths had reshaped the destiny of an entire species, and through that destiny, the galaxy itself. In the end, the lesson was clear. To threaten humanity was to gamble with survival, for once awakened, it would not rest, it would not forgive, and it would not stop. The empires had thought they were teaching a lesson. Instead, they had learned one carved forever in fire and ash: humanity endures, humanity adapts, and humanity destroys.